More news is emerging about actor Philip Seymour Hoffman's death and his alleged overdose. Sources tell the New York Daily News that 70 bags of heroin, 20 hypodermic needles, and 5 prescription drugs were found in his home.
Wow. Here to discuss heroin and its rise in popularity in Hollywood is addiction specialist Joe Schrank. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi, Joe. Sorry you're here under these circumstances.
Yes, me too. We'd love to go out of business, but...
Well, heroin use is up allegedly more than 70%. How do you explain its rise in popularity in recent years?
It's a difficult thing to explain. Nobody really knows. Drugs in popularity kind of ebb and flow. You know, the 80s saw a resurgence of cocaine, and even in the 90s with the grunge rock thing, there seems to be a romanticized thing about heroin, the tortured artist, that kind of thing. So it never really leaves the culture. It does, I think that it's also connected to the prescription pill issue because people start with those kinds of drugs, the opiates, and then they can no longer access them or they can't afford them any longer because heroin is cheaper. Okay, so that might be one of the reasons.
You mentioned tortured artists. Let's talk about some of the celebrities who have abused and died of heroin overdoses over the years.
Yeah.
We have Philip Seymour Hoffman, obviously, Corey Monteith from Glee last July, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Billie Holiday, John Belushi, Basquiat, River Phoenix, the supermodel Gia. Why is heroin so popular with celebrities?
Well,
and are they more susceptible?
Well, I think that people who seek fame have a certain personality construct where they would be susceptible to other issues. You know, the ego is something that's very delicate among all humans if you're the person who is under scrutiny all the time or on camera. So I'm not really sure. There's never been any scholarly research done about why celebrities are more susceptible. I think that if you followed accountants or if you followed plumbers, that you would also find a high use of intoxication.
Okay.
And so I mean, I think that we know about celebrities.
Okay.
You know, there are 105 overdose deaths every day in America.
Wow.
So there were 104 people who overdosed and died that we did not know about. I mean, their families and their communities knew about them, but when somebody like as high profile as Philip Seymour Hoffman dies, it starts to seem like, well, gee, what's with Hollywood kind of thing. And so I do think that there probably is something to it, but it's hard to say.
Well, you mentioned earlier that the low cost makes it affordable for some people, but is it also true that the high mirrors that of prescription pills, and that also makes it irresistible to some people?
Well, it is. There's a big association with withdrawal and craving, and that's one of the reasons that an opiate addiction is so difficult to unravel, is the physical sensation of it when people come off of it is very difficult, and the primitive brain is giving them one message, which is do it again. And so when somebody's feeling really, really awful, and a heroin or opiate withdrawal is like the worst possible flu that you can imagine, and so people can't really do it on their own, and they try. So it's, yes, I think that people end up going to places where they wouldn't before. I mean, they may have started with prescription medications as a recreational thing. We see a lot of that among youth culture. And then when they no longer do that, or it grows and grows and grows, they'll do what it takes. And if what it takes is, you know, injecting chemicals into your bloodstream, there are people who will do it.
Well, the Ace of Spades bags of heroin were actually found in Philip Seymour Hoffman's home.
Right.
What exactly is Ace of Spades, and how does it differ from other forms of heroin?
In the drug culture, there are various brands of, and it changes. Now, anyone who wants to trust their drug dealer with what's in it is, you know, I mean, it could be stamped with absolutely anything. This is one of the things and one of the reasons from a public health perspective that we see prohibition is really a difficult thing. Could be stamped Ace of Spades, Queen of Hearts, whatever. We don't know what's in it.
And that's the fundamental problem. You never know exactly what you're buying.
That's right. You don't know what you're buying. You don't know what's in it. You don't know what it's cut with.
It could be baking soda. It could be
rat poison. It could be absolutely anything.
Mm.
And so that's one of the really difficult things. And to be clear, because I've gotten this question a lot of this horrible strain of heroin, there's no safe heroin.
Mm. Right.
You know,
Let's make that
Ace
clear.
of Spades or Jack of Hearts, you know, there isn't any safe heroin. So the answer is, you know, don't be on the lookout for a particular heroin. Just stay away from it in general.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of people saying, I'm going to just try it once, but can you be addicted from that first
There
try?
are people who can be addicted to it right away. There are certainly people who are able to do that in a recreational setting. There are not very many of them. And so it typically is a ramp up. people start with other forms of intoxication, and it grows and grows and grows. And so very few people are able to use heroin in any kind of social way.
Wow.
Let's talk about fentanyl. It's showing up in a lot of these toxic batches of heroin. Now, is this a drug that's used to treat cancer patients?
It's used for extreme pain in cancer patients. It does
Okay.
not treat cancer in any way. But there are forms of cancer that are more painful than others. So bone cancer, for one, or stomach cancer are notoriously extreme pain. And so fentanyl will be used for those particular patients.
And so they're using fentanyl and putting it and mixing it with heroin.
And mixing it with heroin. It's sort of like ramping up the volume. It's sort of like, a more concentrated thing. Like instead of diluting the orange juice with water, you just eat the orange juice, the frozen can of orange juice. So it's a difficult thing. And again, as somebody who and I run a treatment program, Rebound Brooklyn, here in New York City, and we see a lot of heroin use. We see a lot of it among young people. There isn't any safe level of heroin. There just isn't any way that's reasonable. And so fentanyl or whatever it's mixed with it's a horrible situation.
Why do you think it's so popular amongst the middle and upper class? Because historically, heroin was regarded as a quote-unquote dirty drug for the lower class, but we see it on the rise.
We see, I think that heroin and opiate addiction has always permeated the culture. I really believe that minorities, specifically the black male, pays the price for the drug war. And so the idea that's a cliched, unsubstantiated claim that heroin is something for lower classes. People who are addicted to opiates, they go across all economic lines, whether it's affluent suburbs, whether, whatever it is. I think that the incarceration rates are disproportionate to lower income and people who, look, if you're a kid from Greenwich and you're shooting heroin, your parents are going to hire a lawyer and they're going to make it go away.
Wow.
That's what's going to happen. And so I think that that's really
And if you're a
the
kid
issue.
from the Bronx or Harlem, you're going to get a public defender.
You're going to get a public defender, and they're going to prepare the case in the hall if you're lucky, and you're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that's sort of, those are oversimplifications but that is largely what happens.
Wow. Well, what advice do you give to people who are struggling with heroin addiction and to families that may have someone struggling?
The families are the big issue for sure, because heroin is the Tasmanian devil in family systems. It just rips everything apart. There's 11 million children living with a parent in need of treatment.
Wow.
That's not all heroin use, but that's a lot. And really, we talk about lots of different things, and we seem to forget the children who are the casualties of this thing. My message to families: there is hope. Treatment works. It's a medical illness. As frustrating as it is not a characterological thing. It's not something that people want to do. It's very hard to keep it in that perspective. And the more and more that we find out, and the more research on brain issues with addiction, the more we understand that like any other chronic disease, whether it's diabetes, whether it's HIV, that it's something that can be treated and it can be managed. It cannot be cured. And that's what I think happened to Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think lots of people have diabetes and then they don't do well for a while, or cancer was once in remission and then it wasn't, and that's
Because apparently he'd been off the drugs for the better part
for
of
many
2
years.
decades.
He was very public about having been a young man and gone to rehab and had lived for a long time without intoxication at all, whether it was heroin or anything, and then
He
it eroded
relapsed
away.
last year.
And it can happen to any of us. There are 20 million Americans who report that they are living their lives in recovery, and so it can absolutely work, and it can absolutely happen, and it can absolutely backslide. Wow. There's no question about it.
Well, you mentioned your organization. Can you give us more information about that and where people can go to get help?
Yes. Rebound Brooklyn is a treatment program here in New York City. It's managed, the clinical oversight is with a medical doctor, which we think is important. And it should be stated that if Philip Seymour Hoffman had been on Suboxone, one of the opiate maintenance or antagonist therapies, this probably would not have been the outcome. His craving, his withdrawal, all those things. So we believe that a medical component, a strong medical component with treatment is critical. And so that's why, lots of times people go off to rehab and you're not humble and they're yelled at, and all that. And that's kind of an old style. But we think that the brain, what is the brain?
Right.
It's a muscle, it's an organ, it's something that's studied by people from medical school. So, we have lots of different modalities and treatment approaches, but that's a really strong one.
All right,
So,
before you go, what's your website?
www.reboundbrooklyn.com.
All right, thank you so much for your help.
Thank you.
All right, and you're watching Arise Entertainment 360.